This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 564 for July 22nd of 2021. Li-Cycle's fast and cheap and easy way to recycle EV batteries. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Hello, Gary.
John, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good. You too?
Yep. You know, one of the things that occurs to me is that you and I are driving different cars all the time, and we never really talk about it. And this week I've been driving it. You've probably had this car, the Lexus RCF Fuji Speedway Edition.
I have not had the Fuji Speedway Edition. No, not that one.
Man, that is something else. 472 horsepower. Woo, very nice.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the sister publications that I do some writing for is Composites World. And this thing has a composite hood, a composite roof, composite tail. You get inside the car. I mean, it's just an array of composites. I mean, it's just astonishing. I mean, it's cool as an object. I mean, you could just take the engine out and just look at the damn thing. It's just unbelievable. But okay, be that as it may.
Just so you know, I'm test driving a Genesis G70 this week.
And
it's a lot of fun. I mean, I just got it today. So I went out to lunch and came back. That's as much as I've driven it.
So in other words, what normally took you 10 seconds took you 3 seconds.
That's right. This thing's quick.
Okay. All right. So quickly, I do have something happened in 1911. Okay. An establishment of a brand, a domestic brand. I'm giving you big clues here.
Yes,
a domestic brand was established in 1911. And what do you think it was?
Oh, man.
And it still exists.
Still exists.
Okay.
Yeah, I should know these things. But I don't. So I'm going to guess Buick.
So close, but so far away. GMC.
Oh, yeah.
So basically what happened was that William Durant had purchased a company called Reliant Motor Car Company in 1908 and Rapid Motor Car Company in 1909. And despite their names of motor car companies, they were commercial vehicle manufacturers. And then he put them together. And so it became General Motors Truck, which then the name over the years morphed itself into GMC.
Now, I thought there was some Grabowski brothers that were somehow tied up in that. And it, a lot of people have said it originally stood for Grabowski Motors.
Right. I think that is sort of like a, I don't know, Yeti type myth. We know it exists, but we really can't prove it. All right.
Gary, that's good. Yeah.
So let's bring in our journalistic colleague,
Joann Muller.
Hi, guys.
Good seeing you.
Yeah, you too.
So, Joann, you tell us you're working on a newsletter these days.
Yeah, I'm still writing about the future of transportation for Axios, but I'm delivering it now in this cool new newsletter called Axios What's Next. And we're looking at the future of cities, the future of work, and the future of transportation, which really are all kind of knitted together in this post-COVID world, right? I mean, everything that we planned that was expected to happen isn't happening, or it happened faster. And so we're coming out of this pandemic and the whole world has changed. We don't know if we're going back to the office. Well, if we don't, what does that mean for commuting? What does that mean for cities? So there's a lot of stuff in the near future that we're covering, and I'm bringing the transportation mobility component of that. And it's a daily newsletter every morning at 7 a.m. And it's really kind of fun. We have a trivia question every week too. So Gary, I think you should be entering that.
All right.
Morning trivia.
Joann, isn't it amazing how much COVID has affected things? Like you said, wiped it out or accelerated it?
Yeah. And it's really, it's kind of fun because nobody knows anymore what's going to happen. So we feel like we're helping to dig that out as opposed to letting some consultants tell us.
And as a reader, I can say that this really is an interesting newsletter because, as you say, it deals with a variety of topics, but they all sort of mesh together, and it's like a gear. I mean, one helps the other move. So I would highly recommend people just check that out.
Thank you.
Axios.com newsletters, and then I think you just check the box and
add button. Yep.
And voila.
Good deal.
So speaking of the future.
Yeah, speaking of the future, let's bring in our special guest today, Ajay Kochhar from Li-Cycle, CEO, if I got that right. Exactly. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's right, John.
Okay, good deal.
Yeah, good to be on.
Ajay, great to have you on here.
Yeah, thank you.
You and I know each other. We talked late last year, but boy, a lot of big news at your company right now. But, just to kick things off, give us a thumbnail sketch. What is Li-Cycle? What do you do?
Yeah, certainly. So we're a lithium-ion battery recycling company. Just really brief, high-level background. I'm a chemical engineer. My co-founder and I come from the lithium industry, so we're really chemicals, specialty material folks. And lithium is one of those materials. Obviously, people know lithium-ion battery. It's used in the battery. Demand really changed for that material over a very short period of time. So we were building plants that make that material for mining and refining. So way other end of the supply chain. And look, I mean, everyone has had this question, what is going to happen to all these batteries when they're dead is a common approach. And I think what some people don't realize is you also have scrap, right? When you make batteries, it's not perfect. And although it might be a low percent of the output of a battery manufacturer, across many factories, that's a lot of material. And to give you one stat there, 2013, there were 3 battery cell factories in the pipeline in the world. 2021, as of today, there are 225. So Li-Cycle is addressing that in 2 waves. We have technology to do that, clean technology company, and I'll get into all that. But yeah, this last 12 months has really accelerated in the space, in the electrification space, and as a byproduct, we're keeping up with our customers.
Ajay, in a given battery pack in a vehicle, let's say, just average, I mean, how much lithium is in it? I mean, so the question is that, we all say lithium ion batteries like we know what we're talking about, and we don't. And, I just want to get a sense of, how much is actually in there.
Yeah, so lithium's in the name, and it's important, obviously, because it's the ion that goes back and forth that creates the charge. But actually, lithium is only a few percent, usually 2-3%. If you look at a broad pack in the chassis of a vehicle, it's not a huge percentage of the actual mass. So what's the balance? Well, the balance is, you have to go back to fundamentals of what's in a battery cell, like even the cell in your mobile phone or the like. There's a cathode, there's an anode, those are powders, they're coated onto foils. So the cathode foil is aluminum, anode foil is copper. It's literally painted on there. They're kind of sandwiched together with a separator in between so they don't short circuit. And then it's tightly wound. It could be like in this, phone that's like a prismatic type. In a Tesla, they use a cylindrical type. So very technical terms like jelly roll. That's what it's called, the actual inside of the battery. It's actually funny. We get these other types of batteries, which are pouch. The operators call those chocolate bars because they like chocolate bar.
I call them TV dinners.
So just
this
to
is
help,
good
like
for
really,
journalists to get our heads around this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because they actually kind of look that way. So, anyways, that's what's in an actual cell, and then when you have a big pack, it's an assembly of cells in different ways, and there's a lot of smarts that go into that. So, anyways, long way of saying that lithium is in there, but there's a lot of other materials: copper, aluminum, nickel, cobalt. Go on and on and on. So, yeah, a bit of a misnomer. People hear lithium, but it's a valuable part of the battery, but not the only part of the battery.
Go ahead, Joann.
Well, the recycling idea, I think, is, exactly what we need, right? We can't just keep mining these materials out of the earth. However, it's going to be a long time before there's enough material in the cars and even in the scrap electronics or electronics that are done with, to generate the kind of volume of materials we need to create a circular supply chain, right? I mean, give us a realistic view of how long it is before we get to this recycling utopia.
Yeah, the urban mine. Yeah. So I'll split up into 3 phases. I think where we are today, and we always focus on critical materials. Critical materials meaning, for whatever reason, their supply chains are complicated and they have criticality to, for this case, making batteries happen. So I'll highlight lithium, nickel, cobalt, for example. So today, say even last year, cobalt, nickel, maybe 5-ish% came from recycled source. Lithium, frankly, almost nil. So that's been kind of the historical norm. Now, why again am I focusing on that? I think for people to say, oh, there may be tons of lithium and nickel deposits in the ground, but there's a big leap to go from that to the battery material that needs to go into a battery. So there's an issue there. So phase 2 of where we're going to go, and life cycle is a part of that. To your point, Joann, it is a while before you have the true end of life tsunami. And the first wave of material we've been getting is really manufacturing scrap. So that's, for example, the deal that we announced with Ultium, the joint venture between General Motors and LG Energy Solution. That material is actually going to be from their Ohio cell factory. And when you're making a battery cell, I kind of gave you a bit of a picture of what it looks like. All along that chain, there are either offcuts or quality rejects, and it's a high quality bar, right? They want to reach. And it may only be, again, a few percent of their output, but when you're making 35 gigawatt hours of batteries, even a few percent's a lot of battery materials, right? So that's the first wave of material to us. And to summarize, I would say for each of those materials, lithium, nickel, cobalt, next decade, you could see anywhere between 5 and 20%, being supplied from a recycled source globally, industry-wide.
That's a lot.
And then lastly, yeah, and that's a lot from nothing. And then lastly, Joann, to your point, the real future, that's probably 20, 30, 40 years away, where that would truly start to offset mining. So we're on that journey, but we can have a great business today just on scrap, to be frank.
Ajay, tell us a little bit about your process, because heretofore EV battery recycling has been a very manual intensive process, and that's just not going to scale. The auto industry desperately needs this problem to be solved, because we can't just start dumping this stuff in landfills, or we may as well give up on using EVs because they may not pollute the air, but they're going to pollute the ground. So walk us through your process and explain how you've been able to automate this.
Yeah, so in simple terms, we really started from a clean sheet. And what we saw in the industry, why Tim Johnson and I, my co-founder, left to start this business. Again, we come from this space, but from a different part of the supply chain. We just kept on seeing, efforts to put these battery materials into existing facilities or existing technology. And that basically is gravitated to a bit like a square peg in a round hole, nickel style recovery facilities getting these materials. Now, working in the lithium space, nickel space, cobalt space, the really unfortunate thing about that is, you lose a lot of the material, right? You actually lose lithium, for example. And I know I said it's only several percent of the battery, but it's, for us, it could be 25% of our revenue. So it's quite valuable, but it wasn't even being recovered. And that, again, is centered around a thermal style process historically. So that's what the norm has been. What we do, again, simple terms, it's a spoke and hub model. Spokes are basically, think of them as regional initial processing centers, right? So we want to get close to where batteries are and break them down and get them from being a battery that has thermal risk, complexity, right? These are not just innocuous scrap metals. They have some complexity into intermediate products. So that's what our spoke does. We have 2 commercial facilities that do that today. And we've developed that technology. It's patented, owned by us, and it's non-thermal. So we get out these intermediate products, and then secondly and lastly is the hub. So think of it like a reverse logistics model, because when people think hub and spoke, it's the forward logistics where it goes from the hubs to the spokes. This is the opposite. We're bringing it back through the spokes into the hub. And so the hub is lastly a wet chemistry facility, patented technology, non-thermal. But we're taking the intermediate product and going back to the fundamental building blocks. And just to give an analogy, I think of it like the bricks to the house. So where you're making lithium, nickel, cobalt, much more in a grade that's as good, if not better, than mined material. And we can do that, no limitation of times. But that's the fundamental, driver ultimately of our revenue and what unlocks the value of the battery. So moving away from this historical waste-oriented approach that was more thermal in nature.
So Ajay, let me ask you. So to use a more common type battery. So let's say that I have a lithium battery in this mouse, and it dies, and I somehow get it to one of your spokes. So is somebody going to take the AA battery and unpeel it and just take everything apart? Or, I mean, how does that happen?
So that would have happened historically. Great question, Gary. So to John's original question too, we wanted to engineer out all of these stages where there might be a lot of manual intervention, sorting, non-automation, because it adds risk. These batteries the industry term is thermal runaway, fire. So they can have issues, as people know. So you want to make sure that safety is always top of mind and scalability, right? We already are, recycling lots of batteries with respect to scrap, but where this industry is going, you have to add a zero. So we need to be scalable. We can't have, bottlenecks in our process. So the short answer, Gary, is no. It goes right into the spoke process. It's a shredder process in simple terms, but the secret sauce is around safety. So we're doing it in a submerged shredding environment. That's what prevents the fire. But all of that is automated. And we, again, didn't want to sort. So whether it's your mouse battery or it's an EV battery or scooter, e-bike, I can go on. same line, materials going to the same line, automated, no sorting, scalable.
All right, I'm going to step on Joann here. So what happens to all the stuff that isn't lithium, nickel, and cobalt? I mean, you were saying before that there's copper and aluminum and all kinds of other. I mean, what happens to that stuff?
So it all goes back to the economy in our case. And historically, people would just burn off the hard stuff, to be honest. So they would burn off plastic, not us, but others. And they burn off electrolyte. We saw that. And there's big permitting pressure too, right? So imagine your community or a state authority. You don't want that in your backyard. There was one actually example in New York State. I won't mention the name. But there was a group that tried to permit a type of facility like that. And the community called it the battery incinerator. So you don't want to be doing that. So what we do, that's why I'm emphasizing non-thermal. To your question, Gary, plastics we isolate. It's mixed plastics. It goes back to product like wax. So we do send that back to the economy. The copper, the aluminum, that gets recovered for the metal value. And we even get out precious metals like gold and like downstream of us. And then what we're really after is the cathode anode material. So the cathode anode material's a black powder. It's called black mass. You can tell engineers very creative. That's what it is. And that's what contains a lot of the value. That's what contains your lithium, nickel, cobalt. And that's the material, black mass, that's going into our hub, essentially in the second step. So overall, we get 95% recovery of what's coming into us back into a usable product. And the 5% is just functional loss. So it's not perfect. We can't get every unit of lithium into a lithium product. We have losses along the way, but we keep working to boost that and get it more efficient.
Ajay, the Biden administration has started to pay attention to America's shortcomings in terms of supply chain for electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, they want all the cars to be electric, but then they forget that we don't make any of the batteries here, and we don't get any of the certainly the raw materials are coming from other places, and there's some ethical issues involved in sourcing as well. So all of which is to say they are now starting to put effort into building up these supply chains. My question to you is, are they doing enough, and is it too late?
Yeah. So if you'd asked me this, administration aside for a moment, if you asked me this maybe 24 months ago, I would have said, like, my gosh, we are so behind the eight ball. And, if we don't get started now with something, then we're going to be in deep trouble. And of course, this is a national security issue as well, right? From a supply chain standpoint. So now where we are, I'll say on a positive note, I'm very encouraged by the sense of urgency. So when we have conversations with key stakeholders, they get it. couple of years ago, this whole conversation around critical materials, the whole supply chain, it was kind of like, what are you talking about? Now, at least there's that recognition, but we have to move. We have to move aggressively. And it can't just be, battery cell making. One of the things that we're working with stakeholders to understand is you got to actually invest in the whole supply chain.
Right.
This is way different than ICE vehicles, which we've had, long time to develop the supply chains for. The supply chain is very different. And so you can't just focus on one node. You got to have all of it. Because if you don't, you're going to make something and it's going to leave the country and it's not going to really, serve the purpose. So I'm encouraged, Joann, but we have to move aggressively. With my comment.
AJ, it's very impressive that you can break these batteries down very quickly into their constituent materials. My question is, what about the cost of them? As I keep pointing out, all of the plastic in cars can be recycled, but virtually none of it is, because recycled plastic costs more than virgin plastic. And this industry is so cost driven that are they going to be able to take your recycled battery materials, put them in batteries, and compete with virgin material?
Yeah, so this is actually right back when we started the business. This was a very key thing for Tim and me. And to be very frank, we wouldn't have gone into this if we didn't feel convinced that this could have merits on its own commercials. And so what I mean by that is we didn't want to have a subsidy. We didn't want to rely on government support. We didn't want to have a premium over other types of products to make it work, because we've seen that in other industries and it's tough, right? It comes down to, at the end of the day, commercials for many things. So, there's sustainability that's a huge push now, but there is that commercial element too. So the short answer is what we produce, lithium, nickel, cobalt, can be cheaper than mining and refining. And the way to think about that is this battery, car battery, this battery in my phone, it is the most rich source of those materials that does not exist in geology. You don't find a deposit in geology in the Earth's crust that has lithium and nickel and cobalt and manganese and copper and all these things, right? So our starting source is super valuable, right? Very concentrated. And there's not a lot of waste, right? When you dig things up out of the ground, there's always some level of waste, tailings. Then it comes to the innovation around safety, automation. How do you actually get all these things out efficiently? So that's our technology and what we've patented and commercialized. But the net of that is if you do that in a really smart way, fit for purpose technology, minimize costs, maximize recovery, material by material, head to head, we can be cheaper than any of those sources for mining and refining. What we do need, though, that's what Joann's question was before, we need to continue to get to that larger scale. So we're getting there. Our hub facility in Rochester will be one of the largest producers of cobalt in the US, whether it be mining, refining, or recycling. It's going to be a top 2 producer of lithium nickel. So this is getting to fair scale, but we got to keep the pressure on and have to keep doing that over the next 10, 20 years and beyond.
AJ, where does this material come from? I mean, where do these batteries come from? So are they people who are turning in cars or cars that are going to junkyards? I mean, how does it happen? I mean, right now, internal combustion engines, I mean, no one cares, right? But here with the batteries, I mean, the material is there at end of life, even though the battery may not be able to hold a charge.
Yeah, so when we get post-consumer, like if you had an XEV, for example, and then something happens, it is usually through the dealer network. So when we're contracting with the vehicle OEM in a regional sense, right? So it could be OEM X in US or Canada. So it is the dealer network, and it works well because that is really the reverse logistics node, right? It is where people are, right? Dealerships, and they come back to that network. We then help to ensure that it comes back to us in the right way. Now, I will say that's a controlled in warranty event. Okay, what about you just decide not to go back to the dealership? Maybe you go to a third party. Maybe you go to a different source. So our role is to work with as big of a funnel as possible. We've worked very closely with the vehicle OEMs on that, but also the third party repair shops, auto recyclers. They're starting to see these batteries more and more. It could be in accidents, for example. I'll tell you very candidly, they don't like these types of vehicles usually because it's so different and it messes up their overall economics. So we have to play a role there to say, no, it's not going to be a huge cost or this big issue. We can take the material, do it economically, and that creates a pull mechanism. But our role is to have that big of a funnel as possible with all those channels, no matter where batteries go.
I was wondering about what jobs might be created in your company. We hear a lot about green jobs, but you also talked about automating this process. So, do you see a smooth transition from people who work on ICE cars to green cars and batteries?
Yeah, I'll give you like a real life example. So our Rochester spoke is in the old Kodak Business Park. So we've actually used an older building there, and it was great for us, right? Because they had all the utilities and but part of that was jobs, right? And so we have people that are working for us that are former specialty in coding and the like. I'll go back to the EV and the ICE part in a moment. But the point I'm making is I think a lot of the transferable manufacturing heavy industry skills, industrial general skills, are quite transferable. And one of the things about this overall shift, one of the misnomers from my view, people say, oh, EVs is going to require way less jobs overall. I don't agree with that. Because if you look end to end on the supply chain, making raw materials, battery cell making, pack making, through to the actual vehicles, through to recycling, all of that together, definitely in my mind, net creates more jobs. And these are high skilled, many cases, all the way to operator type jobs for us. But it's very integral, and it's skill sets that at the end of the day are generally, in my view, pretty transferable. So I've heard that statement out there sometimes. I don't agree with it. And I really do think this is an opportunity for great job creation and economic creation too.
Oh, that's a great viewpoint. I hadn't heard that before. Hey, let's get back to the deal that you signed with General Motors and LG at the Ohio plant. You're saying that's going to be from manufacturing scrap, what the manufacturing people like to call engineered scrap, because it was deliberate, right? Not some screw up on their part. But I got to believe GM must be looking down the road and thinking maybe your process is good for these end-of-life battery.
So that's a great point, John. And any vehicle OEM that we work with, these are kind of the usual nodes where we start to plug in, right? So the here and now problem is really the engineered scrap, to use your term. So that's here and now, that's ramping, and they need a solution and it needs to work well. And they've been very happy with what's out there. It's a full spectrum type approach. It's not just commercial. They have to get comfortable with the technology, with the health and safety standards, the quality, right? So it's a very rigorous approach associated with that. But when they made that selection, just to use the example of Ultium, which was a joint selection between General Motors and LG to go with us, they were looking at a phased, broader vision, right? So as you said, there's end-of-life material, right? There's going to be, think about it this way. We're getting, say, the 5%, whatever the number is today, of that ultimate manufacturing output, but that 95% is going to come back at some point. So they are thinking about that definitely today. And one other point on this about the kind of the trajectory of where we'll likely go, just broadly speaking, in this industry, the end products we make, lithium, nickel, cobalt, these OEMs all have sourcing teams that are trying to get secure supply of lithium, nickel, cobalt. So they definitely see the secondary source as something they can also plug back in to their supply chain. And that is the true circular economy model, that when people think about this, they say, oh, getting back the materials, you're going to send it back to their supply chain. Yeah, we're generally moving in that direction. And I'm super encouraged. The last 12 months, the amount of activity from our customers is unprecedented. So their acceleration, how committed they are now, is happening. We've been in this industry for a long time, Tim and I, my co-founder, and there's been fits and starts, and you all know this very well. And there was always this question of, is this going to really happen? And I can say from our vantage point right now, it's firmly happening. And hence they need a solid recycling and critical material supply strategy for all these OEMs, including GM.
So to that point, as you look at, say, the earlier part of your career, knowing what you know from that, all these announcements that car companies are making on a seemingly a daily basis of, we're going to build gigafactories, which is all good news for you for the engineered scrap at the very least. But is there a sufficient amount of available critical materials like the lithium, cobalt, and nickel.
Nickel, manganese,
In lithium.
Yeah, this is pretty specific by material. Look, I think on a near-term basis for any of them, again, what's critical is getting it from the ground into that high specification battery grade material that can actually go back into a battery. I think by material, the one I would be most worried about, to be candid, is lithium. I think nickel and cobalt, we see pathways for those. There is a big shift. There's other aspects like social, 70+% of cobalt comes from the Congo. That has been tied, of course, child labor, unfortunately. So OEMs are trying to move away from that supply for other reasons, but just from a pure supply demand standpoint, those have a path, I would say, but there's a lot of investment needed. Lithium, I'll just give you an example here, just briefly. The overall math on the amount of investment needs to take place in that industry to get to the demand figures that are the result of all these announcements is around $12 billion in the next 5 years into the refining of lithium chemicals. Historically, the maximum number that has been per year is maybe close to $1 billion. And when I say that number, I mean going into producing assets, not exploration, not the early stage. It's actually into producing assets. So if you ask me, that is a little concerning, but there are a lot of great entrepreneurs on that side of the coin, and they're pushing and they see the opportunity, and there's a big incentive to bring production online. So I'm going to take the optimistic view and say it's going to happen, but it won't happen easily. So just something to keep an eye on, obviously, this overall supply chain.
We're probably going to have to wrap up this segment of the show right now, AJ, but want to really thank you for coming on here and explaining how you're attacking battery recycling, which is going to be clearly one of the imperatives if we're going to go forward with electric cars.
Of course, the urban mine of the future, as Joann said, that's the utopia of the future, but there's some steps to get there, and we could be a significant part today and in the medium term. So we're excited about the path ahead, and thanks for having me on.
That's great.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick commercial break right now. Give a shout out to Bridgestone and Borg Warner, two of the sponsors that make this show possible.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
Well, we're back. I thought that was a pretty interesting segment. I'm fascinated by Li-Cycle and what it's been able to achieve here. And, I've been following them for a year or so. And when, GM and LG Chem selected them to do recycling, that's when I thought, we got to get them on after hours.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that he sees a path to doing this with an economic advantage on both sides. And I think that's what's really, really key here.
I hadn't thought of that before, but, if you want virgin material, you got to go to these big mines, you got to mine it. Like he pointed out, there's tailings. I think there's different ways of getting lithium, but in hard rock mining with lithium, only 3% of the rock is lithium. So you're throwing away 97% of what you pull out of the ground. And then you got to send it to be refined, and then you got to make metal out. So you go right to the battery. You skip all those steps.
Well, I find it kind of ironic, right? So we're destroying the environment in order to save the environment, right? So recycling is critical for sure, but realistically, it's not really going to be making a dent in the mining that's necessary between now and 40 years from now, when we can finally get to a circular economy. I talked to JB Straubel about this as well. He's got a similar recycling company, Redwood Materials, and they're starting small too. They're taking a lot of electronics in from phones and all that stuff, as well as the scrap that's coming from the Panasonic Tesla Gigafactory out in Nevada. But it's still so small, and I think it's really important to be realistic about this. It's the answer for sure, but it's just going to take a long time to get there. And in the meantime, we've got to do a hell of a lot of mining if we're going to build all these vehicles, electric vehicles that we say we want. There's a lot of uphill stuff to go still.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, there was that report that the International Council on Clean Transportation came out with, and it was looking at life cycle of emissions, and basically said, if you look at an EV and you compare it to an internal combustion engine, right now, it's lower, 66 to 69% in Europe, 60 to 68% in the US, and 37 to 45% in China. Meaning that they're looking at the environmental impact on these different types of technologies, and at this point, electric vehicles are better for the environment.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. I'm just I just think that there's a very big picture here that we have to take into account. That's all. And these supply chains are critical. And, until recently, they were getting no attention whatsoever. And it's hard to get people, other than, let's say automotive people or engineering people, to really, appreciate how important those supply chains are. People, I think you said it before, one of you did, we just get in the car and drive. We're not thinking about where all the stuff came from.
That's right. Well, Gary, I know you got a list of other topics you'd like to see us get into today.
Well, I thought one of the interesting things was I don't know if you guys noticed, or like I was going to check Delta this afternoon, and Delta was down. There was another East Coast outage of Amazon was down, Delta was down, a whole bunch of things were down, and coincidentally enough, Lucid was supposed to have the vote on the SPAC today. And, there was a concern that apparently it wasn't going through because they thought that spam filters had taken some of the ballots that people who work or who are owners of this Churchill Capital, which was the SPAC partner, that it just went into spam, so they didn't have a sufficient number of people voting, and so that they were going to wait until tomorrow for this. And this would be $4.5 billion worth of fresh capital. And I was wondering, gee, could it also have been an effect of this, this internet outage? And, and I keep getting back to this thing of, okay, so many cars that are going to be autonomous are in certain ways dependent on the cloud. What happens with an outage? So two things. Let's talk about the Lucid SPAC and whether this means that Lucid is going to be a legitimately solid car company. And B, what are the consequences of things like, the fragility of the internet on autonomous vehicles? And Joann, I think this is like all your, what's next space.
Well, yeah. So, the key, we need 5G for these autonomous vehicles to run, and the 5G needs to be, instantaneous. We're still, a ways from having good coverage anywhere, and it needs to be reliable. And so, I had not been paying attention to the outage that you were talking about. That's interesting, but it's a concern, right? You can't get your website. Imagine if your car won't do what it's supposed to do. as for Lucid itself, I think they're an interesting company, and they've done a lot of. I feel like they've raised the bar, advanced the movement on electric cars with the efficiency that they're getting out of their battery pack, and that's fantastic, and that's how eventually you get to lower priced, affordable electric cars for everyone. But right now this is just another luxury EV. The EV transition depends on getting cars that anyone can afford. And so I haven't driven the car yet. I'm sure it's wonderful. I think $4.5 billion is going to help them really get, to the next level. But as we've seen with Tesla, I mean, Tesla, nearly ran out of money 3 or 4 times in their 15 or 20-year history, right? So this is just a capital-intensive business, and there's got to be consolidation. Whether Lucid is one of the ones that survives, I don't know yet. I think it's way too early, but I do know that it's going to be a smaller industry. All of these EV startups are not going to make it, for sure.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Joann said. We know we've had Peter Rawlinson on the show from Lucid. We know they have got a great team there, very experienced people. They are following an asset-heavy strategy, building their own plant. Gary, you mentioned $4.5 billion. My guess is that's what the valuation of the company is going to be. I don't think they're actually going to raise that amount of cash. It'll probably be in the high hundreds of millions, or you're shaking your head there.
No, it's $4.5 billion in fresh capital.
Wow. So, well, let's see what the SPAC actually comes through with. Usually the valuation of the company is much higher than the actual cash they get from doing a SPAC. But I agree essentially with what Joann said in the fact that it's hard to break into this business. And SPACs have been one of the enablers. Direct sales to consumers instead of going with dealers is another. We got a gig economy. You can hire engineers anywhere you want in the world these days. They can work at home. So the traditional barriers have come down. Still doesn't make it any easier. It makes it easier to get your company launched, but that doesn't guarantee success. And I hope they are successful. But how many luxury EVs do we really need?
Well, that's a great transition to another EV manufacturing company, Fisker, which you're talking about different mechanisms to get vehicles to consumers. And so earlier this week, Henrik Fisker said to Automotive News about how the dealership structure are, quote, ancient laws. And today they said with less than 500 days to run before we start on-time production of the Fisker Ocean, which of course will be an asset-light manufacturing operation since they're not going to be doing it. We are simultaneously focused on crafting our customer journey. Our brand experience centers will be the primary physical touch point for the majority of our prospective customers. So here we have Fisker saying, okay, what we want to do is create the total environment that we will own, that people will come into and see our vehicles and touch them and presumably own them. So now the Fisker Ocean is supposed to start at $37,499. So Joann, does this fulfill the lower cost since the average price of a transaction price is now above 42 grand? And do you think this whole model will have legs of experience centers versus traditional dealerships?
I actually find his model very intriguing because, as you said, it's asset light, right? He's contracting out the manufacturing. He's a car designer, right? So he knows how to make a beautiful looking car. And, I haven't seen the Ocean up in person yet. I've seen pictures of it. I think it looks good, and if you can sell an SUV at that price and then you get a federal discount or tax incentive, so you get a 37.5 is what the price is. So now you're talking 30,000 once you take away the federal tax. That's very affordable. I think this idea of a brand experience center, Tesla already showed us how that's done, right, with their galleries, and Lucid's doing the same thing. And I think that most of the others will as well. There is still some legal fighting to occur about, how those stores can exist in a state where they say that only franchise dealers can sell cars, right? So the transaction is moving. It already has moved online. I mean, the pandemic taught us how to buy a car online. We should not be feeling that you have to go to a dealership anymore to buy a car. So I think that is definitely the future. But everybody wants to go to a place where they can sit in the car and talk to someone about the features and understand it and soak up the experience. So there has to be sort of this mix of physical and digital transactions. And I think that's what these gallery stores, or whatever Fisker's calling them, brand centers, brand experience center, that's exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I keep pointing out, though, is all these startups say, okay, we're not going to go with franchise dealers. We're going to build our own salons, and then we're going to have our own service centers. Kind of sounds like a dealership to me. And besides, dealers, they pay to build their own dealerships. The car company doesn't. Ford, GM, Toyota, Mercedes, they don't spend the money to build those dealerships. The dealer spends the money. And in fact, in many cases, they borrow the money from the car company to do it. So I'm not sure where there's going to be any great savings going the route that the startups are going. And the one area I do agree, though, is they will control the buying experience in a much better way. I still think that can be handled with franchise dealers. It all depends on how you write the franchise with those dealers. Because remember when Saturn was launched by General Motors way back in 1990 or whatever it was, they went out and benchmarked all the franchise agreements. They largely copied so much of what Lexus was doing. Lexus had really set the stage for a new type of dealer franchise. And the buying experience was totally different at Saturn dealerships. Very low-cost cars. People loved going to those stores. They loved the whole buying experience. And they could get free orange juice and coffee and donuts in the morning. They could have their car washed at any dealership. I don't see why Fisker, Lucid, or any of the other startups could not write the same kind of agreement. We'll see if this actually works. My guess is the startups are going to spend a boatload of money building their own distributorships and just not calling them dealers.
And that could be one of the things that forces them out of business eventually, right? Or into the arms of someone else. I mean, there's going to be consolidation. And if your costs of business are too high, your product may be great, your concept might be great, but if you can't afford to, sell and service these cars through your own stores or your own service centers, that could be your demise. But hey, Tesla has figured out how to do it. It's not ideal. I talk to a lot of Tesla people who say, I can't get service, or, whatever. I'm waiting forever for my car to get fixed. There's room for improvement.
But Joann, don't you think Tesla's gotten away with it because the owners, I mean, boy, they are so passionately committed to the car and the company. They'll put up with a lot. Most of them are upper income people. They have another car or two in the garage anyway. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you want to scale up and really reach the mass market, you can't tell somebody who depends on their car, don't worry, bring it back in 2 weeks and we'll get it fixed.
Right. No, I agree 100% with you. Absolutely.
Well, I look at a couple of things here, though. Okay. you can buy an Apple product at Target, or you can buy an Apple product at Best Buy, or you can join the crowds of people that are in Apple stores. So I think that people who are in, the startup world say, hey, we want to create the Apple Store experience. We want people to identify us as a special place. And then in terms of, the mass market, okay, to what extent are any of these companies really planning on, having the next Volkswagen Beetle in terms of numbers of units being sold? I think that their aspirations are much more modest in terms of volume, but they're looking at their margins being much higher than is the norm in the auto industry. So, looking at the aspect of saying, well, we're going to have our experience centers because we want every aspect. We want the font on the sign to be what we want. We want the coffee to be at the exact temperature. All of these things they want to control and take care of, which I think they look at it from the point of view of like, boy, it'd be hard to get a traditional dealer to sign up to something like that.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say, you're right. I mean, it's the buying experience that is mainly, I believe, leading these startups to say, we don't want traditional dealers. But as I said, I look at what Saturn did, and it's all how you write your franchise agreement. And if people don't want to sign that agreement, okay, then they're not your dealer. But I'll bet you can find dealers that would happily sign franchise agreements that would make them do what you as a car company want them to do.
Oh, John, I forgot to ask, how many Saturn dealers are there today?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Joann. But I don't think it was the dealers that drove them, into bankruptcy. I think it was GM top management that absolutely refused to give the company more money to refresh its product line until it was too late.
It's a complicated business.
Right.
All right. So sticking with this all EV approach that I'm taking here today. So Rivian. Okay. So last week, they basically announced that they were pushing back the delivery of their vehicles. So the vehicles are not out yet. So there's the RT1, the pickup, which was supposed to be available in July. It's being pushed back to September. And then the RS1, which was supposed to be available in August, and they're saying it'll be available sometime in the fall. Amazon, of course, as we know, has ordered 100,000 vans, which through 2024, they're saying that's still on schedule. So RJ Scaringe basically said this is a result of the pandemic that they're having problems. Okay, so they're an asset-heavy operation with their plant in Normal, Illinois. Joann, do you think that this is chip-related, health-related, or company discovers how difficult it is to make cars related?
All of the above. Yeah. No, I mean, Rivian is trying to pull off a lot all at once, and they have no experience doing this, right? And so Amazon is a demanding a customer, clearly, right? And I'm sure they need to be focused a lot on that. They also are trying to launch a new brand. They're trying to get a completely new architecture built in an older factory with new equipment. So there's a lot. Even if there weren't a pandemic, and even if there weren't chip shortages, this would be a troubled launch, in my view. And I've always thought it would be a troubled launch. So therefore, their announcement this week didn't faze me one bit. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's probably what I expected. It reminds me of when Nissan was opening a factory in Mississippi, and they were trying to launch 5 products all at once in a brand new factory with a bunch of workers who had never built cars before. And it was rough going in the beginning, right? But they eventually figured it out. In this case, I think the pandemic has clearly upset supply chains everywhere, and then you add the chip shortage in particular is affecting everyone. I personally think Rivian is smart to not try to launch their vehicle until they know it is dead on, right? They need to make sure they get it right, because they only have one chance to launch these products, and they have to do it right. So, people will be willing to wait, I believe. If they really want a Rivian, they'll wait. If they don't, they'll buy something else. There's plenty of other electric trucks out there coming anyways. And, let's see how it goes. But I don't fault them one bit.
Yeah.
What's your take, John?
Yeah, I think they're probably heaving a sigh of relief that they have some excuse to postpone production. But I believe they have been hit by the chip shortage. We know right now the industry is at the absolute worst part of the shortage. Toyota, which a month or two ago was bragging, we kept plenty of boxes of chips around. We got lots of inventory. Well, guess what? They're shutting plants even in Japan. And General Motors, which has said, look, we're going to prioritize production to our most profitable products. They're shutting down their full-size pickup trucks, 2 in the U.S., 1 in Mexico. So that shows you, there ain't no chips out there right now. And so I believe that, Rivian, whatever orders it signed, it's buying chips from the same companies as all the other car companies are. They're way down the totem pole in terms of priority.
Yes.
When a Toyota or a General Motors comes knocking on your door to your chip company, and they say, you either prioritize us or we're going to go find somebody else in the future. You give the chips to them, not to Rivian. What do you think, Gary? You follow a lot of manufacturing.
I think that the issue with Rivian is in large part, as Joann said, okay, here is a company that has never made vehicles that is now trying to make vehicles. And, that is hard. Even Elon came out and admitted it, that they went through quote unquote production hell. Okay. And this is when they had all the pieces, right? He didn't have any lack of anything. And, so that whole learning curve is a big aspect that has to be taken into account for a company like Rivian or Lucid or anybody else. Okay. So what is Fisker doing? So Fisker's saying, okay, we'll rely on Magna. We'll work with Foxconn. Well, those guys can worry about that stuff. We can worry about the product. They can worry about making the product. I think that's a key thing. And it surprised me today that Rivian, it was announced that Rivian has a Project Terra, which is looking to build a second plant. And the second plant will include a 50 gigawatt hour battery production facility within it. Okay. So this is, to the point of asset light versus asset heavy, boy, it seems to me that these guys are pushing a lot of chips on bricks and mortar and manufacturing equipment. And I just wonder about that.
Not semiconductors, but chips, like poker chips, right?
Yeah. Or maybe nowadays you have to bet with semiconductor chips because nobody will take the poker chips.
That's right. That's good.
Does that surprise you guys? That they're looking for another factory already?
Well, look, there's just not enough batteries out there to fulfill the aspirations of all these companies. And so, I know I've seen these stats. I'm sure I'll misquote it, but whatever the number of battery plants in product or in plant being scheduled to be built is like, what, I don't know, 145 or something in China and 9 in the United States. And we only got a couple of them right now, if you count Tesla, and that one's up and running. And then, the GM one and Tesla's in Texas and stuff. So we have to come up with the battery somewhere. We come back to where we started, which is supply chains.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we need the lithium to make the batteries.
Right.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Speaking of electric vehicles and, new demand and new needs for capacity. There was the announcement today that Mercedes came out and said, by 2030, wherever the market will bear, will be all electric. And, So here's my question to you guys. I mean, this was sort of like Cadillac's thing, right? That Cadillac was going to be the luxury builder that was going to be all electric by 2030. Is Mercedes' announcement going to put a damper on the party at the RenCen about this?
No, because the whole industry's got to go electric, whether they want to or not, and because of all these mandates that are banning the internal combustion engine starting in 4 years in Norway, then a whole bunch of countries hit in 2030, and then even a bigger pile in 2035. And give it a few more years, that list is only going to grow, and some may even decide to pull the thing forward. You know, Carlos Tavares was at the Automotive Press Association yesterday, and you know, he was saying he thinks all this floods in Germany is starting to really change people's mind about they've got to start doing things to fight climate change right now, and that's going to mean buying an electric car. He thinks EV adoption is going to go up because of the floods.
Yeah, I wonder though if this isn't just simply a sort of a European reaction to that versus.
I wonder, Gary. It'll be real interesting because you got these wildfires burning out of control all across the western United States. We're getting torrential rains in all kinds of parts of the country, and those parts that are not getting the rain are going through severe drought. And because of the increasing frequency of these very extreme weather phenomena, I think a lot of people are starting to go, maybe the climate is changing, and maybe we are starting to be the ones that are causing it. I think it'll be interesting to see if we have any polling on that, and that tracks consumer perception, and maybe even more importantly, politicians' perception.
Well, Joann, you and your team at Axios, I mean, as you're looking at different things, you were saying earlier that, you're looking at urban environments and developments of transportation systems and so on. I mean, are you talking to people here in the United States that are basically saying, we've really got to make this shift because of the effect on the climate. We just cannot, wait for the government to say, okay, this is a mandate, you got to follow this, that there's, actually the bottom up approach that climate will be addressed.
Well, yeah, and I also think that corporations have taken a whole new stance. They recognize that they have to be leaders on environmental and sustainability issues, and so I think they're moving perhaps faster than the U.S. government has. Also these are global companies, so they see the changes happening in the mandates in China and Europe. It will catch up eventually, right? But I'll share a story. Yesterday, a couple of days ago, I was in New York, and I decided to try the future of urban mobility, which is taking a helicopter from Manhattan to JFK instead of the $140 Uber Black ride. I paid $195 and got there in 5 minutes, and it was amazing. However, I was up in the air and looking at this spectacular city skyline that was engulfed in smoke that had come across the entire country. And it was just like a very sobering reminder to me, that we have no choice but to change our transportation modes to make them more sustainable. And so I think electric eVTOLs, the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, they're actually gonna be a thing. I had been I was sort of suspicious about how long it would take, but I think that's actually going to come faster than we think. And that's just one form of electric transportation. And bring on the hydrogen fuel cells too. I think we need to get this transition happening faster.
That was our topic last week, was hydrogen fuel cells. We
there
had Charlie Freeze from GM Hydrotech. Yeah.
Right.
But he basically was making the argument that will be not necessarily for consumer vehicles as much as it'll be for commercial vehicles. Now that's a big help, but Still, we've got to, I think that you guys at Axios are identifying the fact that this has got to be a multimodal solution and not just okay, we all have EVs, problem solved. That's not going to be it.
No. I mean, electric buses are going to be critical, right? The thing is, we got to figure out how to move the most people as efficiently and as sustainably as we can. And mass transit is a big part of that answer, but it has to be cleaner. And, in a health pandemic, you got to make sure people feel comfortable.
Cleaner in two ways.
Yes, exactly.
Well, hey, we ought to wrap things up here. But Joann, great to have you back on the show again.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Hopefully we'll do it in person in the studio one of these days.
Hopefully. Well,
Thanks,
good.
Joann.
Gary, we'll see you next week.
Okie doke.
Want to thank everybody for having tuned in.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.